because generally stress derails us from our goals, it makes it harder. But when you have solid goal-directed habits, stress can actually make you do better in terms of working towards your goals, which is absurd, but awesome. And the idea is basically like when you're stressed, you're gonna go into your default mode. And if you set up default habits that support your goals, you're gonna continue to make progress towards your goals, even while you're struggling with, being able to think about and make decisions and figure out what to do. And motivation goes down, willpower goes down, all of these other things that you've been used to work towards your goals get reduced by stress, whereas habits get amplified. So habits are really what we want to rely on. And that sort of gives us more of a bandwidth too. When life gets tough, if we have habits that are taking us to our goals and all this other stuff is going on, we have more bandwidth to deal with that other stuff than we would if we were trying to use, grit and willpower and, just brute force to sort of push towards our goals.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Nick Carrier's Best You podcast. I am super fired up today. I was just telling her I've been looking forward to this podcast episode for a while now. I've got the one and only Dr. Melissa Davis with us today. Dr. Davis, I just want to start off by saying thanks so much for spending the time with me today.
Yeah, I'm super happy to be here. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, of course. So just to further introduce you real quick, you're the author of Evidence-Based Habit Building, Finally Get Shit Done. And like I told you, ever since I read the book, I've been so excited to get you on because I feel like so many of the things in your book is kind of the approach that I like to take with my clients. One of the things that
I like to say in regards to kind of getting closer to your fitness goals is a lot of people
kind of know what they should be doing. They're just not actually doing it. They're not actually following through on what they know. And so kind of one of the things that I try to get across to my clients is like, it's not just a matter of discipline and not just a matter of willpower. It's a matter of like setting yourself up for success by setting up habits and stuff like that. So reading your book for me was a ton of fun. And the way I kind of want to start today is one of the things that you say in your book, and this is kind of a quote from page 9 actually, is habits take a while to acquire because our brains make sure the reward or the consequence is consistent and ramp up automatically accordingly. And the reason why I bring that up is because I think that probably the most important thing in order to be successful with your fitness goals is consistency. And one of the biggest reasons why people aren't consistent is because they're not patient and they feel like after a couple, 2, 3, 4, or 5 weeks or whatever,
they're not seeing the results that they want. And a lot of times it's because they haven't taken the time to form the habit. So I just kind of want you to take a second to talk about why it is that habits take a while to form and how important it is to kind of stay patient with the process and stick it out until the habits are kind of a little bit more formed.
Right. So if you kind of just as a metaphor, an analogy, if you kind of picture water on a piece of land and it's just sort of seeping around, right? It could go any different direction. That's kind of how our behavior in response to situations and contexts is. But then once you start digging a little trench in that land, the deeper you dig and the longer you spend filing away that little trench, the more water is going to go automatically in that direction. So that's kind of how habits are. You're sort of digging a trench as an analogy in your brain so that when you encounter a certain situation, you'll act in the same way consistently over time. It doesn't happen right away. Like you build the first trench, a little water goes in, but some still goes elsewhere. And that's kind of how behavior is too. You start trying to form a habit and you're still going to mess up sometimes until you've got that brain trench nice and deep so that your behavior just sort of automatically flows when it encounters that situation.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that analogy a lot. I think that makes so much sense and something a lot of people are going to understand immediately. So I think one of the things that a lot of people think about or read about is like, how long does it take me to actually form a habit? And there's so many things out there that say like, it takes this long, it takes this long, it takes this long, it takes 10,000 hours, it takes 30 days, it takes 2 months and stuff like that. And, I think that most people, even the people who say that, would agree that it's not just so cut and dry in regards to how long it actually takes. So talk about a little bit of some of the factors in regards to like what determines how long a habit takes to form.
Right. So for instance, if you're trying to start a new habit, but you have current habits that get in the way of that, you not only have to create a new habit, you have to undo old habits. So you've sort of doubled your workload in that case. If you're just trying to add something new, like, oh, I'm going to start flossing more regularly, that's something people could probably integrate in a couple of weeks. If you've never exercised in your life and you want your new healthy habits, your healthy lifestyle, that might take you a year to really get all of the pieces together and consistent. So I think people just need to take into consideration their position, like where are they coming from? How new is this behavior? How difficult is it for them? How stressful is it for them? How big of a change is it? And do they have knowledge and experience in this area that'll help them start that habit already? And all of those factors play into how long it's going to take. But it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight, no matter what it is.
Yeah, no doubt. And I like what you said in regards to like kind of how new is it and how close to that habit have you been acting in the past. And so one of the things that I kind of, the way that I verbalize it to a lot of my clients when we're talking about what it is we want to be doing on a weekly basis is try to choose something that you feel like you're willing and able to do based off of what you've been willing and able to do in the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and another good tip when you're deciding what habits you want to form is to make those decisions and make those goals when you're a little less comfortable. If you're in the middle of a hard run and you're thinking about like how you're going to take your exercise up to the next level, you're going to make a more realistic decision than if you're sitting on the couch as you have been for months and you're like, I'm going to start this really, huge exercise program. I'm going to make these big changes. It's really easy to overestimate what you are willing to suffer through when you're comfortable. When you're uncomfortable, you tend to have a little bit better perspective of what you're willing to deal with for.
I like that a lot. It makes so much sense. And anytime, because I do a 10-week fitness goal setting program with people, and anytime I kind of have it so they start off by setting the goal and setting off kind of like their habits on their own, and then before we actually start, I'll hop on a call with them, talk about what they've come up with, and every single time, almost inevitably, I have to like scale people back. Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's really revealing in regards to like try to almost come up with your goal when you're uncomfortable or in the middle of the workout or when you're like I don't know. I think that's how else can like people implement that and apply that, because I feel like it's a little bit hard to tell people like go on a run and while you're on a run think about what your goal is.
Yeah, sometimes what I'll have clients do if they're coming, for a diet and training, and they have these big goals, I say, let's start. I'm not going to like throw that off the table, but let's start with something more moderate just for a few weeks, like a little bit more moderate diet, a little bit more moderate training goals. And if after a few weeks, you feel like you're ready to take it up a notch, we definitely can. And almost always, except for some sort of very experienced clients, they get to those 2 weeks and they're like, no, this is hard, but I can handle it. And I really don't want to mess that up because I'm, riding the success. And I'd rather keep riding the success than push myself so hard that I end up failing.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So one of the things that I was pretty intrigued by from the book early on was how habits are a lot of times amplified or stronger during stressful moments. And I thought that was, pretty revealing. I think you talked about maybe a study in there where healthy college students eat healthier during exams, and then unhealthy college students actually eat worse during exams. So their current habits are just essentially amplified, if you will, during stressful situations. And you kind of talk about in your book why it's so important to like form habits, because inevitably stressful times are going to come up. And so you're gonna need to have the good habits to be able to back you up. So talk a little bit, riff a little bit, a couple minutes on that idea and how we can try to form habits during unstressful times so that in stressful times we're set up for success.
Yeah, so absolutely. I thought that study, just the first time I read it, it blew my mind. I was like, wow, this is why habits are so powerful, because generally stress derails us from our goals. It makes it harder. But when you have solid goal-directed habits, stress can actually make you do better in terms of working towards your goals, which is absurd, but awesome. And the idea is basically like when you're stressed, you're going to go into your default mode. And if you set up default habits that support your goals, you're going to continue to make progress towards your goals, even while you're struggling with, being able to think about and make decisions and figure out what to do. And motivation goes down, willpower goes down, all of these other things that you can use to work towards your goals get reduced by stress, whereas habits get amplified. So habits are really what we want to rely on. And that sort of gives us more of a bandwidth too. When life gets tough, if we have habits that are taking us to our goals and all this other stuff is going on, we have more bandwidth to deal with that other stuff than we would if we were trying to use, grit and willpower and, just brute force to sort of push towards our goals.
Yeah. Is there more, is there more studying or is there more explanation as to why that is, as to why habits are amplified in more stressful situations?
Yeah, so basically your brain, this from sort of anecdotal experience, we all do, like there's only so much you can think about and handle at a time before you start sort of slipping. And the way that habits work are they don't really engage your conscious thought. So you encounter a stimulus or a situation or a context. And in the case of habits, there's an automatic sort of immediate connection between the experiencing of that context and the behavior. And you don't have to think about it. Like one of the silly examples I give in the book is flushing the toilet, right? If your home toilet has a side flush and you go stay in a hotel that has a top flush toilet, you're going to keep reaching for the side for like a week and you're not thinking about it. You're not sitting down and thinking like, I know that the toilet flush is on the side. It's automatic. It's unconscious. So your habits are unconscious and therefore they free up more conscious space for you to think about other things. Like if you didn't have the motor habits for driving your car, you couldn't listen to the radio and drive your car. You'd crash because it'd be hard to think about the two things at once. So habits serve a really important purpose in terms of evolution and freeing up our conscious mind to do other stuff. And we can sort of take advantage of that fact, build the habits we want, and leave our conscious sort of bandwidth open for other stuff. Yeah,
no, that makes a ton of sense. And I actually didn't think about what I'm getting ready to say until we started talking about it. I had a guy who is a Paralympian track athlete on my podcast, kind of in the middle of quarantine, or I guess towards the second half of it, and we talked about what has allowed some people to be more successful during quarantine and kind of like stay sane, if you will, versus the people who didn't. And we talked, he kind of mentioned how everybody he knows, the people who were successful through it, is because they already had really good habits and really good routines set up beforehand, so that the stressful situation, if you will, of the quarantine didn't throw them off their rocker as much of people who didn't have that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, that was super intriguing. I think that was kind of the first time I made that connection between these two things. One of the things I'm very intrigued about is you talk about scale anxiety in your book, and I am always kind of amazed, it almost like makes me upset when I talk with people who are so afraid to step on the scale, or when I talk to people for the first time and they're like, I haven't stepped on the scale in months, because they're afraid to. And so with my clients personally, if like kind of weight loss is one of their goals, then I'll have them step on it one time a week, because at the end of the day, you kind of do need to be stepping on it with some frequency, because a lot of times this, like what I tell them is the scale is feedback for what you've been doing over the past however amount of period of time. So talk a little bit about scale anxiety and where the balance is. And obviously it's probably a little bit different from depending on person to person, but like, what is too much versus what we need to actually do?
Yeah, so I usually have people weigh a couple times a week just because I like to get a nice average. You might get one weight and they just had, salty food the night before, and it was salty food that was in their diet, but they're retaining water, and then they get, sort of defeated that the scale went up. And having them see the fluctuation that happens can a lot of times help a little bit with that anxiety. But what I find is really helpful too is that we have the scale, we have this number, and that's part of our data set of what's going on, right? But it can't tell us everything about outcome, but what completely dictates outcome is our behaviors. So if we also track what we're actually doing, then no matter what the scale says, we can know that we're doing the absolute best we can to work towards our goal, right? So if the scale went up 2 pounds, but the last 3 weeks you've been like 99% on point with your diet and eating habits and exercise habits, things are happening. They're just not showing up on the scale yet. And you can sort of take some kind of solace in the idea that, like, I know changes are happening because I'm doing all of the behaviors that support this outcome. And then the scale sort of becomes less of this magical number that pops up and we don't know why things happen. And it becomes just sort of a vague bit of information that we can interpret along with what we know we've been doing behavior-wise.
Yeah, no, you said it perfectly. The scale is a lagging measure, right? Like by the time you step on the scale, you can't do anything to influence the number that's actually going to pop up. All the things that you've done in the past is going to influence it. So you want to make sure you actually track the things that are going to influence the number that pops up. So that's awesome. One of the things in regards to kind of like back up in the goal setting process in regards to not necessarily the action, but setting the goal itself, that you talk about is how a lot of people kind of set goals based off of what other people how other people set goals or what other people are going after or what they assume other people want their goals to be. So how can we make sure that we stay personally aligned with the goals that we set, if that makes sense, rather than adopting the goal of somebody else or what we think our goal, quote, should be?
Right. Yeah. So I think there's a couple things, especially from the coaching perspective, to think about. First of all, a lot of people come to you with what they think is a goal, but they don't really have the in-depth understanding of the trade-offs that will be involved. Maybe they're seeing these people on Instagram who have like veiny abs and they're so lean and they're like, that is what I want. But when you explain to them like what has to be given up to maintain that level of leanness year round, a lot of people are like, you know what, I don't want that bad. I like my life and my social interactions and these things that I do where I can eat and enjoy myself. So giving people a good perspective and sitting down with yourself if you're making your own goals and thinking about like what sacrifices are actually needed to get to this and where on that spectrum do I fall? How much do I want to prioritize this outcome versus my experiences? What will I give up? And then the other thing I think that's really important is, first of all, you don't usually achieve goals that aren't tied to a sort of intrinsic value because you lose your initial motivation. You don't have really anything to cling to if you don't have personal intrinsic drive for that thing. So what I like to help people do if they don't really have that to start with, they want to get in more shape, but their stated goal is because, I want to look good naked or whatever, which is perfectly fine. But if you find a way for them to frame that so that it's tied to a value, like, I want to look good because I value, hard work. I value my health and I think fitness is important. And I want my body to reflect that to the world. I want my body to reflect those values. Then that's a more personally tied thing. It's something they can write down and look at when the diet gets hard. And just spending some time just thinking about where they're at and where they can go to next. So a lot of times people, again, like the Instagram can be great for, social support and all kinds of inspiration and things like that. But a lot of times people will just be sort of looking too far ahead of their current position in terms of their physique goals or their performance goals. And it can be really defeating to realize like, I'm going to get to that level for 2 years. That's a really, long ways away. And it's hard to get excited about something that's that far away. So sort of setting up some more moderate goals for like progress, even if you're keeping that pie in the sky end goal in the back of your mind, setting up some shorter term goals for moving towards that ideal.
Yeah. I like so many of those things in there. Setting up those shorter goals, and all that kind of stuff. One of the things that I actually can give you a lot of credit for in regards to something that I've adopted in my coaching is the trade-offs thing, and really being honest with yourself. Like, what am I actually willing to sacrifice in order to achieve this goal? Because that's one of the things that I do with now, after having read your book, with my clients when we come back. Like, literally just recently, probably 6-7 weeks ago, I started with a client and she was like, I want to lose 20 pounds over 10 weeks. And then we were talking about that, and I was like asking her what she's got going on over the next 10 weeks. And she had like her brother's wedding in week 5 of our program. And I was like, it's your brother's wedding. Like, be honest with yourself. Do you like, what's that going to look like? What's that going to look like for you? And so, we were like, you're probably not going to lose the average of maybe 2 pounds a week during that week, but maybe you can stay the same or close to the same. So let's scale back the goal because of that. And that's exactly what she did. And like, that was literally her brother's wedding. I think it was like a week and a half ago, and she stayed the exact same weight that week. And we talked about the conversation we had beforehand. So like, that was an awesome implementation because of what you wrote in your book. It was awesome.
That's amazing. And you probably, like, not only did you help her set more realistic expectations and not be disappointed about the outcome of the diet, you probably made her experience at her brother's wedding 100 times better. Because otherwise she would have probably eaten and drank anyway because it's her brother's wedding, but she would have felt guilty about it, right? And it would have just been a whole stressful, guilt-ridden process. Whereas thinking about, like, am I willing to make this sacrifice, and just building that into the plan makes it so much better on every level.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of goes to the idea of, you don't have to be perfect in order to be successful toward your goal. Like, you don't have to be perfect every single week. It's just about like setting the more realistic expectation of the goal itself. I think the next place I want to go is stress-induced unwanted behavior, because that's one of the common things that I see in so many people that I have clients when they talk to me about I'm a stress eater or a stress drinker or whatever it is. And one of the things that I've kind of started to do that you talk about too is not necessarily, like, the stress is still going to happen. How can we just make it a more productive behavior towards the goal? So talk a little bit about how, if somebody comes to you and says, I'm a stress eater, how do I fix that? I'm a stress drinker, how do I fix that? What can I do?
Right, yeah. So there's enough strategies for that. My usual first thing is, can we reduce the stress? Can we work on that first? Because that sort of has multiple benefits in addition to taking away the unwanted behavior. Obviously, we all have lives and jobs and things that bring us stress sometimes, and it's just going to happen. So one strategy is to find an alternative. So you think about, like, what is this behavior doing for the person? Like, they don't want to do this behavior, but it has some benefit. And what is that? In this case, it's stress relief. So, okay, can we find a replacement behavior that also relieves stress? Because it's going to be a lot easier to replace that stress eating with something else that relieves their stress than it is to just not stress eat. That's going to be more of one of those willpower brute force things that isn't necessarily very reliable. Another thing you can do is the habitual responses, like we talked about, tend to be so automatic, right? So if you can start to just be aware of when you're getting stressed and create a pause between those feelings and your reaction. Sometimes if you just say, like, all right, I'm stressed, I'm on a diet, I want to eat a piece of cake, but I'm going to take a 10-minute walk and think about that first. I'm going to read my why that I wrote down, my intrinsic motivation for this diet, and I'm going to take a 10-minute walk. And if when I get back, I still want cake, I'll have it. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to be able to resist the cake because they've gotten away from that automatic response. And they've had the time to process and consciously think about it and make an alternate decision.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And or just like tape your why on your pantry or something like that, and like make stop yourself.
Make sure you have to stop. Yeah. And think about it. And then some other things that this works for some people, for other people it becomes sort of dysfunctional. So you just kind of have to try strategies with your clients and with yourself. Making things harder to get to, like if you have things in a house that you're trying to eat, you don't necessarily have to lock them away, but you can put them in the pantry in the garage so that you have to walk all the way out there That gives you time to put that pause between the situation and the response and think about it, which gives you the chance to make an alternative decision. So
Yeah, that's definitely one thing I've started to have people do as well. I'm like, keep the wine in the garage fridge, rather
then you
than.
have to spend that whole walk up to the garage thinking about how you shouldn't be drinking this wine because you promised yourself you wouldn't for the next 10 weeks or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. No doubt, no doubt. That's awesome. I think the next. Okay, yeah, I want to get into the importance of actually tracking and self-monitoring some of the things you do, because our brain likes to remember when we do things well, but it likes to forget when we don't do things as well. And sometimes we have the false perception. You have a quote that's like, the most serious obstacle to self-control is faulty perception of one's own behavior. And there's no doubt, if you haven't identified what it is that you're doing wrong, then how do you start to fix it? So talk about the importance of self-monitoring and how people can go about kind of tracking some of their own behaviors themselves.
Yeah, so I like to say, like, not if you're trying to make behavior changes to support your goal, not keeping track of that, not keeping it for some sort of reference is akin to starting a diet and weighing yourself only on the first day and the 90th day or whatever it is. Like, you don't know what's happening in between. All you're measuring is the final outcome. And you don't have any option to sort of auto-regulate as you go if you don't know what's happening. So it sounds really silly, but bust out Excel and start tracking, how many days a week did I eat vegetables with my meal, if that's the goal, or how many days this week did I stress eat? Was it less than last week? Sometimes it's hard to tell, if you're someone who stress eats like 18 times a week, maybe this next week you only stress ate 16 times, but it doesn't feel any different. So you don't know that you've progressed. You don't know that you've gotten better, and you might feel like a failure and stop trying. So keeping track can be really helpful for motivation. It can be really eye-opening if you're kind of looking through those rose-colored goggles and assuming that you're doing awesome when things aren't changing very much at all.
Yeah, no, I like that at the end. Like, it's really important in both ways. Motivation, and it's like, oh wait, I am more off track maybe than I thought. And one of the things that you talk about in your book, which is one of the kind of principles I have embedded in my program, is how like your self-efficacy is based off of can be based off of the amount of success that you've had. And if you don't know you're being successful, then how are you going to build up your own self-confidence and belief? Yeah. So it's really important to get that feedback loop. One of the things I really liked that you touched on in your book is about how a lot of us rationalize straying away from goal-directed behavior more often than is actually necessary. Like, to me, that's almost like the reason for this t-shirt is what's very common nowadays. The reason for this t-shirt, what's really common nowadays is like, just like showing up sometimes is what's most important, and not giving it like maybe 100% effort, like, but just showing up with, which I agree with. Like, consistency is super important. But anyways, I think a lot of people convince themselves that I've had a really good last couple days, my body's feeling a little bit tired, I can take the day off. When sometimes that's actually necessary, but there's kind of like the balance in our brain. And I think like nowadays it's getting more and more popularized towards the take care of yourself, like self-care, take the day off, that sort of thing. So where is kind of the balance to make sure like we're not rationalizing, avoiding our goal-directed behavior?
Right. Yeah. And it's a fine line to draw, and it's hard because, self-care always sounds good to give yourself a break. It always sounds nice to be nice to yourself, and you should be nice to yourself. But I think what can be helpful is to set up a criteria for yourself from the get-go so that you check a certain number of boxes. Like, am I, feeling on a scale of 1 to 10 stress, I'm feeling a 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, like fatigued, I'm feeling a 10. And maybe you set up just for yourself, what is your point at which you give yourself a little break from working towards your goal and acknowledge that you're pausing progress for that self-care, so that you're not just I'm tired today, I'm gonna take a break from the diet, and you end up on this roller coaster of never quite getting to success and never quite getting rest, and you're sort of always in between. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think having a criteria for yourself from the start that you adhere to is a good idea, because it allows you to do that auto regulation. Like, okay, I've hit that point and I do need some sort of release or some sort of break.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And one of the things I've kind of is kind of silly, but over the last 3.5, 4 years, one of the things that I've kind of done a lot of times, not every single week, but a lot of weeks, is I'll eat really healthy during the week, but I always get like a frozen pizza from the grocery store. And on if I have like 5 good days in a row, 6 good days in a row, and like, don't ever have anything bad, then I'll have that pizza at the end as like my reward, because like I know I've done the criteria necessary in order to quote earn that, if you will. And I think that's really important,
Because then it really allows you to be able to actually enjoy that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. When you feel like you can handle, restraint when needed, then allowing yourself to have those things is so much more satisfying, because it doesn't feel guilty, it doesn't feel wrong. It's just like, I get this now, this is fine.
Yeah.
And that's actually my favorite way to do maintenance too, is like I stick to like what's almost a diet during the week, and then the weekends I have fun and it evens out.
Yeah. Well, and kind of the biggest reason why I am such a big proponent of that is I try to verbalize to people in my program that success, I obviously want you to lose your weight. I want you to get to the goal that you want to get to. But success in this program is following through with the promises that you make to yourself. And so if you plan to eat it, then all you're doing is following through. And that's the habit that we want to build.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Before kind of getting into the last question, is there, actually, I'm going to start off maybe two different ways. First, what are your personal 3 most important health habits that you have to do, bar none, on a weekly basis?
Yeah, so I would say my 3 are: get my lifting in. Lifting is kind of hard for me. I'm a jiu-jitsu athlete. I like sports that are more engaging. So lifting is something that a habit I've developed for my health. I don't love it. I do it because I want to be strong and healthy and fit. So that's really important. Getting sleep, so getting to bed on time, getting a good night's sleep every night, I feel like has made one of the biggest differences just in my mood and my capacity to achieve things in all aspects of my life. And the third thing, I've gotten much more interested in sort of attending to health, like long-term health. So just getting in fruits and vegetables and not, I have a tendency to go full frat boy if left to my own devices and eat just like string cheese and crackers, So I've forced myself to keep fruits and veggies in at least 2 meals every day so that I have that health benefit.
Nice. And maybe to use almost that last one as an example, what are some habits that you have formed to make doing those 3 things easier, or to set yourself up for success for doing those 3 things?
Yeah, so I found that I don't do well if I have to do a lot of prep for the meal. So I like to keep like spinach and, chopped sort of salad fixings just ready to pour into a bowl. Fruits and vegetables, again, like it sounds really stupid, but cutting up an apple is sometimes just more than I'm willing to do. So like I buy either smaller apples so I can eat the whole thing, or I get berries because I can just pour berries in a bowl and eat those. So just, it's a good idea to make the things that you want to do easier on yourself. Like life is hard enough and achieving goals is hard enough. The easier you can make the steps that lead up to that, the better. So I just try to limit the things that will stop me from doing that, limit the extra work that'll bother me and things like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, 100%. I absolutely love that last one, because it's kind of silly, right? But it's like really important, because a lot of people will think I'm not eating my fruits and vegetables just because I'm not disciplined and don't have the willpower to do it, when it's like all you could actually do is maybe buy smaller apples, or buy different fruit, or buy spinach instead of something that you have to chop up, and you'll be more successful with doing that, because those small things are just super, super key.
Yeah, sit down and identify like what stops you. See if you can get rid of that with another strategy.
Yeah, I love it. No, I'm glad that you said that. One of the questions that I have my clients ask themselves each week is, if I were not to do this thing that I'm supposed to do, what would my excuse be? And how do I make sure that I don't make that excuse?
That's really smart. I like that.
Yeah. Well, before I ask the last question, I just want to acknowledge you. Like I said, I've gotten so much personal value from your book and from your work that I've already implemented into my coaching style and my coaching philosophy, and that I've been able to get across to my clients. And obviously, it's been doing some good stuff. One of my clients was able to enjoy her brother's wedding because of you. So
that makes me super happy. That was definitely the goal.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I appreciate your work, and looking forward to continuing to absorb more of it.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Well, I want to make sure that I know everybody's going to want to go learn more and everything like that. So you guys make sure you go to rpstrength.com, and you can find Mel on Instagram at regressive_underload. And I'll have that all linked up in the show notes. And like I said, her book online is Evidence-Based Habit Building, Finally Get Shit Done. Would definitely recommend that you read it, because it will open to your eyes as to how you can start to set yourself up for success at a much higher level. Is there any other place that people should go to learn more about you and support you and stuff like that?
Those are the two main ones. The habit book should also be on Amazon with an Audible version pretty soon, read by my husband. So that'll be cool. But yeah, that's basically it. RP Strength and Instagram are my main portals.
Awesome. Well, good deal. Well, last question here, Mel, is that I think that getting closer to the best version of yourself is both a constant journey and a unique journey. I don't think that we're ever necessarily at that best version of ourselves. And I also think that the way that I'm going to get closer to the best version of myself is going to be a little bit different than the way that you get closer to the best version of yourself. So last question is for you personally. If there are 3 things that you can currently do, or 3 things that you can currently work on to get closer to that best version of yourself, to get closer to that best Dr. Melissa Davis that you could possibly be, then what are those 3 things that you could currently do or currently work on?
Yeah, so currently I'm working on becoming a better outdoors woman. So I'm just trying to learn more about hunting, horsemanship. I have a mule who I'm trying to learn to pack. So those are 2, I guess, things. And then I guess the third one would be continuing to learn how to best manage my time, because I have a really diverse sort of interests, and I constantly feel like I can't be working full time towards all of them. So learning to manage that or narrow things down that I want to do would probably make me a better person.
Yeah, that's hard for all of us to do, especially if you're somewhat ambitious or somewhat driven. You always
are constantly thinking of things that you want to do or get better at, and so it's hard to stay focused on one at a time. Well, that's all we got. That's all we got today, Dr. Davis. I really appreciate your time. That was awesome.
Thank you so much for having me.